Like Waitress asked to play for a $1 tip, Billionaire laughs, no ideas. She's a violin prodigy. What if one moment of courage could change two lives forever? That's exactly what happened on a sultry Friday evening at Magnolia House, a soul food restaurant tucked away in downtown Atlanta. Where are you listening from? And what time is it there right now? Zariah moved through Magnolia House like a ghost with purpose. 3 plates balanced on her left arm, water pitcher in her right hand, weaving between tables without a sound. 2 years of practice had taught her the art of invisibility, how to serve without being seen, how to smile without being noticed. The violin mounted behind the bar caught the evening light, its polished wood glowing amber. She tried not to look at it. Looking meant remembering, and remembering meant pain. But her fingers still twitched against the serving tray, muscle memory refusing to die. A table of businessmen barely glanced up as she refilled their water glasses. One of them, silver-haired, expensive watch catching the candlelight, held up a $1 bill between 2 fingers. "Play me something for this," he said with a half-smile. It wasn't cruel, just casual. The kind of joke rich men made to women they saw as scenery. Zariah's eyes met his. "Depends on how much you value being wrong about someone." He laughed, not understanding. "Not yet, that was fine." She was used to being underestimated. Ethan Caldwell hadn't planned on dining alone tonight. His investors had cancelled last minute, leaving him at a corner table with spreadsheets on his tablet and a half-empty bottle of overpriced Cabernet. He sighed, scrolling through acquisition projections that should have excited him. 10 years ago they would have. Now the numbers blurred together, meaningless despite the millions they represented. From across the room, he found his gaze drifting back to the waitress, the one who'd made that curious comment about his dollar. There was something in her posture that didn't match her uniform, something in her eyes that seemed to look through him rather than at him. His phone buzzed. Again, the 3rd time in 20 minutes. "Caldwell," he answered. Voice clipped. "The Soul deal is wavering," his COO reported without greeting. "They want assurances about the timeline." Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose. "Tell them what they want to hear. We'll figure out the details later." He ended the call before hearing a response. That was his life now. Building empires on promises he wasn't sure he cared about keeping anymore. When had success started feeling so hollow? The waitress, Zariah according to her name tag, moved with surprising grace between tables. She carried herself like someone performing rather than serving. Her fingers occasionally tapped against her tray in a pattern that seemed deliberate, almost like she caught him watching and raised a single eyebrow. Ethan looked away, uncharacteristically flustered. He wasn't used to being seen, not really. Most people looked at his wealth, his company, his reputation. They didn't look at him. He glanced at the violin mounted on the wall again. Something about it kept drawing his attention. It looked old, well-loved, probably just decorative. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that it was important somehow. "Can I get you anything else?" Zariah asked suddenly beside his table. "Actually, yes," he said, making a decision that surprised even himself. "Tell me about that violin." Her face shifted almost imperceptibly, a tightening around the eyes, a slight press of her lips. "It's just decoration," she said evenly. Like most beautiful things in places like this, but her eyes said something different entirely. The restaurant had emptied considerably by 9 o'clock, leaving Ethan's corner table, one of the few still occupied. He'd finished his meal but lingered, laptop open though he hadn't touched it in 20 minutes. Something about this place, or perhaps someone, had disrupted his usual efficiency. Zariah approached with coffee. "We're closing in half an hour," she said, her voice neither apologetic nor rushed. "I should get back to the hotel anyway," Ethan replied, but made no move to leave. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from him. "Unless you have a minute?" She hesitated, then glanced toward the kitchen. The manager was busy counting receipts. She set the coffee pot down and sat. Not fully, just perched on the edge of the chair as if ready to flee. "Why do you keep looking at that violin?" he asked directly, Zariah's fingers stilled on the table. "Why do you keep watching me look at it?" The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Fair point." A silence stretched between them, not entirely uncomfortable. "I used to play," she finally offered, the admission soft but clear. Long time ago, Juilliard? Ethan guessed, watching her reaction carefully. Her eyes widened slightly. How did you— The way you move, he said. Measured, precise, like you're counting beats even when there's no music. And your hands— He gestured toward her fingers, which had unconsciously been tapping a rhythm on the tabletop. They never quite stop. Zariah pulled her hands into her lap, suddenly self-conscious. Most people don't notice things like that. I'm not most people. No, she agreed, really looking at him for the first time. I suppose billionaires rarely are. He blinked, surprised she knew who he was. Surprised I can read, she asked with a hint of challenge. Your face was on Forbes last month. Ethan Caldwell, the man revolutionizing AI integration. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, perhaps. Being recognized not as a wallet, but as a mind. What made you stop? He asked, returning to the violin. Playing, I mean? Zariah stood straightening her apron. Some music isn't meant to be heard, she said quietly. Then more firmly, your check's on the table. As she walked away, Ethan found himself watching not just her movement but her shadow, longer than it should be, as if carrying the weight of something much bigger than herself. Zariah was wiping down the last table when she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn to know it was him. We're closed, she said, continuing her circular motions with the cloth. I know, Ethan replied. I left something at the table. She glanced back. Your laptop's already in your bag. Not that, he hesitated. An apology. You're prying. Zariah straightened, the cloth still in her hand. The lights were dimmed now, the restaurant empty except for the cook counting tips and the manager locking the safe in the back. You don't owe me anything, she said. Maybe not. But I recognize that look when someone asks about your past. He stepped closer. The look that says there's a before and after. And the bridge between them burned down. Something glinted at her throat as she turned, a small silver pendant on a worn chain that had slipped out from beneath her uniform. A tiny violin, no bigger than a thumbnail. Ethan's gaze landed on it, but he didn't comment. Zariah's fingers instinctively reached to tuck it away, but stopped. My grandmother's, she offered unexpectedly. She played in New Orleans. Jazz, mostly. Classical, when the white folks would let her. And you followed in her footsteps? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I tried. Full scholarship to Juilliard at 17. Youngest black woman in my program. That's incredible, Ethan said softly. Was. Her voice hardened. My grandmother died my second year. Heart attack in her sleep. No insurance, no savings. Just debts and a violin worth more than our apartment. She shook her head. You know how expensive New York is for a black girl with nothing but talent? I had to choose, eat or play. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. What would you do if you could choose both? Ethan asked, not as a hypothetical, but with quiet intensity. Zariah's eyes met his, wary but something else flickering there, a dangerous spark that looked almost like hope. I don't do charity, she warned. Neither do I, he replied. I do investments, in people who are worth believing in. Her lips pressed into a tight line. How would you know what I'm worth? You've never even heard me play. A slow smile spread across his face. Then play. No. Zariah shook her head firmly, though her eyes betrayed her, darting to the wall where the instrument hung. That's just decoration. Ethan followed her gaze to the violin. It was older than he'd first thought. Honey-colored wood with visible grain, worn in places where countless fingers had pressed against its curves. I doubt that, he said. Nobody hangs a real violin just for show. Mr. Hicks does, Zariah said, nodding toward the manager's office. Says it belonged to his grandfather. Blues player from Mississippi. Came up during the Great Migration. Ethan stepped closer to the wall, examining the instrument without touching it. And has it been played since it got here? Not that I know of. Then it's a waste, he said simply. Zariah's eyes flashed. Some things are meant to stay in the past, and some things, he countered, are just waiting for the right hands. The restaurant was silent now, the kitchen staff gone, the manager counting money in the back. It was just the two of them in the dim light, standing before a piece of history, mounted like a trophy. One song, Ethan said softly. That's all I'm asking. Zariah's hands trembled slightly. You don't understand what you're asking for. Maybe not, he admitted. But I understand that some talents aren't meant to stay buried. Not when they could change lives. Something in his tone made her pause. It wasn't pity in his voice. It wasn't even curiosity anymore. It was recognition, as if he saw something in her that she'd forgotten was there. It might not even play right, she whispered, making excuses even as she stepped toward the wall. Probably hasn't been tuned in years. Then tune it. Zariah reached up, her fingers hovering just shy of the instrument's body. 3 years since she'd touched a violin. 3 years of silence, of pretending that part of her was dead. I can't, she said, but her hand didn't drop. You already are, Ethan replied, and he was right. Her fingers were already curling around the violin's neck, lifting it from the hooks that held it captive. The weight of it in her hands, familiar and foreign all at once, made her throat tighten. Mr. Hicks emerged from his office. What's going on out here? Zariah froze, the violin half-cradled in her arms, like something stolen. Sir, she began. She's going to play, Ethan interrupted. If that's all right with you. Mr. Hicks stood frozen in the doorway, his expression shifting from confusion to something unreadable as his gaze fell on the violin in Zariah's hands. My grandfather's violin, he said quietly. Nobody's touched that thing in 15 years. Zariah began to lower it, apology forming on her lips, but Mr. Hicks waved a dismissive hand. Go on, he said, surprising her. If you know how to play, then play. That thing's been collecting dust too long. Ethan smiled, settling into a chair as if preparing for a private concert. The overhead lights had dimmed for closing, leaving only the warm glow of pendant lamps over the bar. Zariah's heart hammered against her ribs. The violin felt both foreign and achingly familiar in her hands, like reuniting with a part of herself she'd tried to forget. She lifted it to her shoulder, the motion muscle memory despite the years of absence. The first stroke of the bow was hesitant, wavering. The strings were badly out of tune, the sound discordant. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. I'm sorry, she murmured, already lowering the instrument. Take your time, Ethan said, his voice gentle. No rush. Zariah took a deep breath and began adjusting the pegs, her ear guiding her fingers as they tightened and loosened each string. The process was meditative, drawing her deeper into a world she'd abandoned. Each string that found its true pitch seemed to harmonize with something inside her. When she raised the bow again, it was with more confidence. The note that emerged was clear, rich, a single pure tone that hung in the air like a prayer. She closed her eyes, letting her body remember what her mind had tried to forget. Her fingers found their positions on the fingerboard, dancing across the strings as if they'd never left. The melody that flowed from the violin was achingly beautiful, Bach's air on the G string, but played with a soulfulness that transformed the classical piece into something entirely new. Notes of jazz crept in, hints of blues, echoes of gospel, the musical heritage of her grandmother weaving through European classicism. Ethan sat motionless, his expression one of complete awe. Mr. Hicks leaned heavily against the doorframe, his eyes glistening in the dim light as Zariah played. Years of buried grief surfaced, the loss of her grandmother, the dreams deferred, the parts of herself she'd silenced to survive. But there was joy, too, rising through the sorrow like dawn, breaking through night. Her body swayed with the music, no longer rigid with fear, but fluid with expression. The final phrases of the piece lingered in the small restaurant, notes fading into silence that felt sacred. When Zariah opened her eyes, tears streamed freely down her face, but she didn't move to wipe them away. For a long moment, no one spoke. The absence of sound after such beauty felt almost tangible. Mr. Hicks cleared his throat, trying to compose himself. My grandfather, he said roughly, used to say music was the sound of what can't be said. I never understood what he meant until now. Ethan remained silent, his gaze fixed on Zariah with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable. But it didn't. Because he wasn't looking at her with pity or even admiration, but with recognition, the kind reserved for seeing someone fully for the first time. That, he finally whispered, wasn't just playing. That was testimony. Zariah lowered the violin, her fingers still trembling, not from fear now, but from the rush of being fully alive again. The silence that followed Zoraya's performance felt almost holy, a vacuum created when something transcendent departs. She lowered the violin slowly, her hands still remembering their purpose after years of forced forgetfulness. "I should put this back," she murmured, already moving toward the wall hooks. "Wait," Ethan said, rising from his chair. His voice was different now, stripped of its practiced confidence, raw with something like wonder. "You can't just play like that and then go back to serving coffee. That's not—" He struggled for words. "That's impossible." Zoraya kept her back to him, violin clutched against her chest. "I told you, it was a long time ago." "No," Ethan said firmly. "What I just heard wasn't past tense. That wasn't somebody who used to play. That was a master who hasn't been heard." Mr. Hicks approached slowly, his weathered face softened by emotion. "Girl, why didn't you ever say something? All these years, you've been carrying around that kind of gift and keeping quiet about it." Zoraya turned, her defenses rising again. "It's not that simple." "It never is," Mr. Hicks agreed. "But my grandfather would roll over in his grave if he knew his violin was hanging on a wall, while someone like you was pouring sweet tea." He gestured to the instrument. "That violin hasn't sounded like that since it left Mississippi. It recognized you." Zoraya's throat tightened. The old man's words cut through her practiced cynicism, touching something deeper. "Thank you for letting me play it," she said quietly, extending the violin toward him. Mr. Hicks shook his head. "Keep it for tonight. Bring it back tomorrow. Or don't." He glanced between Zoraya and Ethan. "Some things find their way to where they belong." With that, he nodded and retreated to his office, leaving them alone in the half-lit restaurant. Ethan stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "Who were you before this place? Before whatever happened that made you stop?" Zoraya clutched the violin tighter. "Why does it matter?" "Because what I just heard doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from training, from heritage, from—" He paused, searching for the right word. "From soul. And hiding that kind of soul is a crime against music itself." A fragile laugh escaped her. "You sound like my grandmother." "She must have been wise," Ethan said softly. Zoraya looked down at the violin in her arms, really looked at it. The wear patterns along its neck, the patina on its body, the stories embedded in its grain. Like her, it had survived. Like her, it had been silenced. And like her, it still had songs to share. "I had a full scholarship to Juilliard," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Youngest black woman in the conservatory program. They called me the New Orleans Miracle because I could play anything. Classical, jazz, improvisation. My grandmother mortgaged everything to get me there." Ethan watched her face transform as she spoke, pride breaking through grief like sunlight through storm clouds. "And now?" he asked. "And now," Zoraya said, her smile sad but real, "I just played for a billionaire's $1 tip." "You know," Ethan said, pulling his phone from his jacket pocket, "I have connections at the Atlanta Symphony. The conductor there owes me a favor." His fingers hovered over the screen. "One call. That's all it would take." Zoraya's body went rigid, the brief moment of openness vanishing like smoke. "Don't." "Why not?" "What you just did was play an old violin in an empty restaurant," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "That's all." Ethan's brow furrowed. "That's not all, and you know it." "What I know," Zoraya said carefully, "is that you're a rich man who's used to fixing things, to making one phone call and watching the world rearrange itself to your liking." She placed the violin gently on a nearby table. "But my life isn't something that needs your fixing. This isn't about charity," Ethan insisted. "It's about talent, about opportunity, about hope." Zoraya laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. "Hope is what broke me the first time." Ethan fell silent, studying her face. "I had everything," she continued, softer now. "The scholarship, the standing ovations, the future. Then my grandmother died, and suddenly I had to choose between rent and dreams." Her eyes met his, unflinching. "You know what happens to black girls from Louisiana when they choose dreams over reality? They end up homeless. Or worse. It doesn't have to be that way now," Ethan said quietly. "One audition, one chance to what? Have my heart broken again when it doesn't work out? When I realize I'm 3 years behind everyone else? When the symphony decides they've already filled their diversity quota?" Zoraya shook her head. Music doesn't just take talent. It takes money, connections, privilege, all of which I have, Ethan pointed out, which is exactly the problem. Zariah's voice cracked slightly. Because what happens when you lose interest? When you move on to the next charity case? When your good deed is done? The question hung between them, heavy with the weight of past betrayals. Ethan pocketed his phone slowly. You're right to be cautious, he conceded. But I'm right too. What I heard tonight wasn't just good. It was transformative. Zariah picked up her bag, suddenly exhausted. Good night, Mr. Caldwell. Ethan sat in the back of his town car, Zariah's words still echoing in his mind. Hope is what broke me the first time. The rain outside painted Atlanta's streets with shimmering reflections. Mirroring his own conflicted thoughts, he pulled out his phone, unlocking it to reveal the screen, paused on the video recording he'd taken while Zariah played. He hadn't mentioned it to her. Maybe that was wrong, but something in him knew this moment couldn't be lost to memory alone. His finger hovered over the delete button. Instead, he pressed play, even through the phone's small speaker. Her music transcended the digital limitations. The way her body had swayed slightly, the closed eyes, the absolute surrender to something greater than herself. It was all there, captured in pixelated imperfection. His driver glanced in the rearview mirror. Beautiful music, sir. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. Back at his hotel suite, he paced the length of the window wall. City lights sprawled below like fallen stars. It was past midnight. His decision crystallized with each step. He dialed a number. Ethan. It's almost 1 a.m, a groggy voice answered. Marcus, I need a favor, Ethan said. Your sister, she's still principal cellist with the Atlanta Symphony, right? A pause. Yes, but what? I need her number now. 10 minutes later, Ethan was speaking with Camilla Washington, first chair cellist of the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. I apologize for the hour, he began. Mr. Caldwell, when a billionaire tech innovator calls at midnight, either the world is ending or something extraordinary has happened, she replied, fully awake now. Which is it? I need to send you something, he said. A recording. 30 seconds. That's all I ask. This better be worth interrupting my sleep. It is. He sent the clip, waiting as she received it. The silence that followed told him everything. Where did you find her? Camilla finally asked, her voice hushed with reverence. Serving tables at Magnolia House. Another silence. That's impossible. That technique, that tone, that's conservatory training. Juilliard or Curtis level? She was at Juilliard, Ethan confirmed. Full scholarship. Had to leave when her grandmother died. Camilla made a soft noise of understanding. The story's too common. Talent crushed by circumstance. A pause. Does she want to audition? We have a fellowship program for exceptional musicians returning to performance. Ethan gripped the phone tighter. She's afraid to hope again. Then maybe hope needs to find her, Camilla said firmly. Dr. Sullivan is holding special auditions for the summer session next week. Black & Roots Classical Initiative. Full stipend for selected artists. She won't come. Then bring her, Camilla challenged. Not as a favor to you, as a service to music. After ending the call, Ethan stood at the window for a long time, watching the city pulse below. Had he overstepped? Possibly. Would Zariah be furious? Definitely. But some risks were worth taking. He typed out a text to the number he'd gotten from Mr. Hicks before leaving the restaurant. The Atlanta Symphony is holding auditions next week. Black & Roots Classical Initiative. Full stipend. No strings attached except the ones on your violin. I'll understand if you delete this message, but I'll never forgive myself if I didn't send it. He pressed send before he could reconsider. 3 days passed with no response to Ethan's text. He'd almost given up when his phone buzzed during a virtual board meeting, Magnolia House, 10 p.m. After closing, he arrived 15 minutes early, finding Zariah waiting outside. Mr. Hicks's violin case clutched in one hand. You recorded me, she said without preamble. Without asking, Ethan didn't deny it. Yeah, and sent it to people. Yeah, why? The question hung between them, simple yet profound. Ethan considered the practiced answers, about talent and opportunity, about wasted potential. None of them felt honest enough. Because when you played, he said finally, I remembered what it felt like to care about something that wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. Zoraya's eyes narrowed, searching his face for deception. "So I'm what? Your redemption project? Your spiritual awakening?" "No," Ethan said quietly. "You're the most honest thing I've encountered in years." The door to Magnolia House opened, and Mr. Hicks stepped out. "You two planning to stand in the rain all night? Or you coming in for coffee?" Inside, the restaurant was transformed in its emptiness. Tables gleamed in the low light, chairs upturned except for 3 at a corner table where Mr. Hicks had placed a steaming pot of coffee. "I read about that audition program," Zoraya said as they sat. "It's legitimate, prestigious." "It is," Ethan confirmed. "I'd have to practice. Hours every day. After not touching a violin for years. Yes, I might fail." "You might." Zoraya's hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "Then why risk it?" Ethan leaned forward. "Because regret is worse than failure. Trust me on that." Mr. Hicks poured himself more coffee. "My grandfather used to say music ain't about being perfect. It's about being true." He looked at Zoraya with gentle understanding. "That night you played, that was truth." Silence settled between them. "Comfortable now rather than tense. I still don't understand why you care," Zoraya said to Ethan. Her voice softer, Ethan met her gaze directly. "Because what you did reminded me that success means nothing without meaning. Without joy." Mr. Hicks nodded approvingly. And for a moment, the 3 of them sat in quiet communion. 3 lives intersecting at the crossroads of second chances. The coffee had grown cold, but none of them moved to leave. The moment felt suspended, fragile, as if a decision hung in the balance of their silence. Finally, Mr. Hicks cleared his throat. "My grandfather, John Willis Hicks, came up from Mississippi with nothing but that violin and the clothes on his back. Played in juke joints from Memphis to Atlanta just to eat. His weathered hands traced the edge of the violin case. And taught himself to read music when nobody would teach him. Played Bach by day and blues by night." Zoraya listened, her eyes never leaving the case. "He used to tell me," Mr. Hicks continued, "that instruments choose their players, not the other way around." He pushed the case toward Zoraya with gentle insistence. "This one's been waiting for you." Zoraya's hands trembled as she touched the worn leather. "Mr. Hicks, I can't." "You can," he said firmly, "and you will." My grandfather would roll over in his grave, knowing his violin hung silent on a wall, while hands like yours were pouring sweet tea. Ethan watched the exchange in respectful silence, understanding he was witnessing something sacred, the passing of not just an instrument, but a legacy. "What if I fail?" Zoraya whispered, the question barely audible. Mr. Hicks smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with wisdom. "Failure is playing it safe until the music dies inside you. Success is letting that music out, no matter who listens." Tears gathered in Zoraya's eyes as she opened the case, running her fingers along the violin's curves. "I'll take care of it," she promised, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll make it sing again." "It already has," Mr. Hicks said, patting her hand. "First time in 15 years, that violin found its voice again, found its purpose." He stood, nodding to both of them. "Now, if you'll excuse an old man, I need my sleep. Lock up when you leave." As he walked away, Zoraya lifted the violin from its case, holding it against her heart rather than her shoulder, an embrace rather than preparation to play. "Thank you," she said to Ethan. The words simple but weighted with meaning. "For what?" "For seeing me," she answered, "when I'd forgotten how to see myself. Would you like me to explain or break down the code?" The restaurant felt different now, not just empty but expectant, as if the walls themselves had witnessed something transformative. Zoraya carefully placed the violin back in its case, closing it with a reverence reserved for precious things. "I should get home," she said softly. "It's late," Ethan nodded, standing to gather his coat. "Let me walk with you." Outside, Atlanta had transformed. The earlier rain had cleared, leaving the streets glistening under streetlights. A distant saxophone wailed from some late-night club, its melody drifting through the humid air like a ghost. They walked in companionable silence, Zoraya clutching the violin case close to her side. It wasn't heavy, not in weight, but in meaning, in possibility, in the responsibility of legacy. Each step felt like movement, not just through space, but through time, carrying her back toward the person she'd once been, while simultaneously pushing her forward into someone new. "I live just past Edgewood," she said finally. Not far. Ethan matched her pace, hands in his pockets. I keep thinking about what Mr. Hicks said. About instruments choosing their players. Zariah smiled, a genuine one that reached her eyes. My grandmother used to say something similar, that the right violin finds you at the exact moment you need it most. She glanced down at the case. I didn't believe her then. And now? Now, she paused under a streetlight, her features illuminated in soft gold. Now I'm wondering what else she was right about. A couple passed them, laughing, arms entwined. The city breathed around them, alive, vibrant, full of hidden stories like theirs. Whatever happens with the audition, Ethan said carefully, this moment was worth it. Hearing you play, watching you remember. Zariah nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. They reached her apartment building, a modest brick structure with window boxes full of resilient herbs. She paused at the steps, violin in one hand, keys in the other. Thank you, she said simply. Not just for the opportunity, for pushing when I needed to be pushed, Ethan smiled. Thank you for reminding me what matters. As they stood there, something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but understanding. Two people carrying different weights, walking different paths, yet recognizing something essential in each other. Zariah turned to climb the stairs, then paused. Tomorrow, she said, I practice. Zariah's apartment was barely large enough for a bed, a dresser, and the small table where she ate her meals. But today, she'd pushed everything to the walls, creating a small clearing in the center where she stood, bow poised over strings, eyes closed in concentration. 3 hours had passed since she'd begun. Her fingertips burned, unaccustomed to the pressure of strings after years of absence. Sheet music lay scattered across her bed. Pages printed at the library, etudes she once knew by heart, now strange as a foreign language. The first hour had been humiliating. Her once perfect intonation wavered. Her vibrato felt mechanical. Her fingers stumbled over passages that had once flowed like water. Frustration built with each mistake until tears blurred her vision. But she kept playing. By the third hour, something began to shift. Not mastery, not yet, but remembrance. Her muscles slowly recalled what her mind had tried to forget. The connection between heart, hand, and sound gradually realigned. A knock at her door startled her mid-phrase. She opened it to find Ethan standing there, holding a paper bag that smelled of something delicious. Sorry to interrupt, he said. I thought you might forget to eat. Zariah realized suddenly that she was starving. How did you know where I live? You told me last night. Just past Edgewood. There aren't many apartment buildings in this area. He held up the bag. It's just sandwiches. From that deli on the corner. She hesitated, then stepped back to let him in. Ethan's eyes took in the cramped space, the scattered music, the evidence of hours of work. But his expression held no judgment, only admiration. How's it going? He asked, setting the food on her table. Terribly, she admitted with a small laugh. Then better. Then terrible again. She flexed her sore fingers. I forgot how much it hurts to come back. But you are coming back, he observed, nodding toward the violin resting on her windowsill. That's what matters. They ate in comfortable silence, the small room filled with unspoken understanding. When Zariah picked up the violin again, Ethan simply sat in the corner chair, quiet and present, neither interfering nor leaving. By the time evening shadows stretched across her floor, something had changed in her playing, a confidence, a surety that hadn't been there that morning. Not perfection, but purpose. 6 months passed like a symphony, periods of frenetic intensity, followed by moments of breathtaking stillness. Zariah had practiced until her fingers bled, auditioned with trembling hands but unwavering determination, and earned not just admission to the fellowship program, but recognition that had left the judges speechless. Tonight, the Atlanta Symphony Hall gleamed with anticipation, every seat filled, the air electric with expectation. Behind the curtain, Zariah stood in a simple black gown. Mr. Hicks's violin, now truly hers, cradled in her hands like a talisman. 5 minutes, the stage manager whispered. Zariah nodded, her throat too tight for words. 6 months ago she'd been refilling water glasses. Now she stood moments away from her debut as featured soloist. When the curtain rose, the lights momentarily blinded her. The audience appeared as a sea of faceless shadows, but she knew exactly where to look. Front row center, where Ethan sat beside Mr. Hicks, both men dressed in suits that couldn't hide their pride. The conductor raised his baton. Zariah lifted her violin, and then there was only music. She played Barber's Violin Concerto with technical brilliance. But it was her expression, the way she made each note both lament and celebration, that transformed the piece into something transcendent. No longer just classical music, but storytelling through sound. The heritage of her grandmother, the struggles of her past, the journey that had led her here, all of it lived in her bowstrokes. The audience sat spellbound. Mr. Hicks wiped tears from his weathered cheeks. Ethan remained perfectly still, watching not just with his eyes, but with his entire being. When the final movement concluded, a heartbeat of silence hung in the air. That sacred space between the end of something miraculous and the world's response to it. Then applause erupted like thunder. Rising to her feet for acknowledgement, Zariah's gaze found Ethan's. 6 months ago, he'd offered her $1 tip to play. Tonight, he'd given her something far more valuable, belief, when she had none left for herself. As the conductor handed her the microphone for the customary soloist's remarks, Zariah took a deep breath. "This performance," she said, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes, "is dedicated to the stranger who reminded me to believe when I'd forgotten how." Backstage hummed with excitement. Flowers arrived by the armful, critics lingered hoping for quotes, and orchestra members stopped to congratulate the night's revelation. Zariah moved through it all in a daze, smiling and nodding, but her mind still resonated with the music that had flowed through her body minutes before. She found a quiet corner, violin case open before her. As she gently placed Mr. Hicks's instrument in its velvet embrace, she noticed something tucked in the lining, a worn dollar bill, the one Ethan had offered that first night. She smiled, tracing its edge with her fingertip. "You were extraordinary." Ethan's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him standing there, holding not flowers, but a small wrapped box. "You didn't have to come backstage," she said. "I did." His eyes held a warmth she'd come to recognize over these past months. Some journeys deserve proper endings. Mr. Hicks appeared beside him, beaming with grandfatherly pride. "My Nona used to say music heals 3 hearts. The one who plays, the one who listens, and the one who needed it most." Zariah embraced the old man, words failing to express her gratitude. When they separated, Ethan extended the small box. "A small token," he said, "for your new beginning." Inside lay an elegant violin pendant on a delicate chain, similar to her grandmother's, but subtly different. On the back, an inscription, "Some silences are meant to be broken. Thank you," she whispered, "for hearing me when I wasn't making a sound." Ethan smiled. "Thank you for reminding me what it means to truly listen." The concert hall had emptied, the audience gone, but the echo of music seemed to linger in the air around them, invisible but present, like the connection that had formed between a waitress who had stopped playing and a billionaire who had stopped feeling. "What happens now?" Zariah asked, closing her violin case with reverent hands. "Now," Ethan said, "you play, and I listen. And neither of us forgets what brought us here." As they walked together toward the stage door, Zariah felt the weight of the pendant against her skin, not a burden, but a promise. The world outside waited, bright with possibility, humming with unwritten melodies. The last note had been played, the first chapter had begun.